For almost 2 decades, Christina Howard led the HR departments of Fortune 100, nonprofit, and privately held global companies. Today, she works with focused leaders and companies that want to ensure their employees achieve internal success to match their external success. She does this through coaching and by creating custom programs, workshops, and training designed specifically to increase productivity, communication, accountability, and connection. She's an executive coach, facilitator, and ex-circus member. We're definitely going to get back to that, which makes her perfect for corporate environments, I guess, especially the circus stuff.
Exactly. Right?
But so today we're going to talk about everything leadership. But Christina, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Mike, for having me.
So before we get to the obvious circus
Right.
question that I've got to ask, I always ask the same first question,
Mhm.
more important than even the circus question, and that's Christina, from all of your experience, what do you believe is the number one characteristic of a great leadership team?
I listened to a few of your episodes, and I might have said the one that was on the last one, which is the ability to assess talent, because that is a critical skill of a leadership team. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and what I came to, it's really the ability to have kind and candid conversations in an emotionally neutral way so that they can get better results.
Kind and candid. I like that. And I'm sure in some way we will get back to that
Yeah.
theme as we dive into leadership. So, all right. So now I got to go back to the ex
Right.
circus member. So when you say ex, I'm thinking, what did you do to get kicked out of the
Right.
circus? But I'm also thinking, what did you do at the circus?
Well, to get kicked out, you have to graduate because it was at Florida State University when I was going to college. And I was in the marching chiefs at the time and was twirling flags. And when I looked across the field, there was the circus tent. And I thought, well, that would be fun to go and do too. So I would go from the chiefs practice over to the circus practice. And it was a blast. We didn't have any clowns or any animals. It was purely circus acts. And it was such a great experience because it really taught a lot of things around like overcoming fear, like the fear of heights and twirling through the air without a net underneath you. And just a lot of resilience because a lot of people don't know, but being in the circus is quite a painful thing to be in physically and emotionally and mentally too, because of the things that you're asking your body to do and that you're expecting yourself to do.
It sounds remarkably similar to being a member of a leadership team.
Exactly. It's
No net underneath you. Most
right.
days could
Right.
feel
Yeah.
kind of painful.
Yes.
So beautiful. So I'm going to start with with a simple question,
Mhm.
but probably not an easy one. Maybe easy for you, but since we're going to talk all things leadership, how do you define leadership?
And the ability to solicit followership,
And followership is what?
having folks aligned and ready to focus on our mission, and they're going to do that willingly and invest extra energy and engagement to make that happen because they care about the team and the results.
God, and along with that, and maybe I'm going to ask
Yeah.
this anyway, even though maybe you just said it, is so that's how you define
Mhm.
leadership. What's the definition of a great leader?
Well, that's where I think that it is about the ability to solicit followership. If you can do that as a leader, most things are possible.
And what is, let's kind of dive into what stands in the way
Mhm.
of that, right? 'Cause but that nobody, people want to be a
Right.
great
Yeah.
leader, but not everybody is a great leader. So what stands in the way of people being that great leader of generating that followership you talked about?
I would say empathy, deep listening skills, focus, and the ability to set a very clear vision for the team.
So talk about empathy a little bit more. And I'm sure, well, I'll talk for
Yeah.
myself. I have worked with leaders that are very naturally empathetic
Mhm.
and others that are not so
Right.
much and need to work at it. So is that empathy, how much of that is natural and how much of that is a skill we need to build?
It is a skill that can be built. Sometimes we lack empathy because we're a little bit out of touch with ourselves. And if you're out of touch with yourself, you really can't be in touch with others. And all of that gets in the way. And that's where we see a lot of ego sometimes, though we might not call that ego. In general, though, empathy can be learned. The intellectual kind of empathy can be learned. And the emotional type of empathy sometimes is just inherent in the person. And yet that can also be learned over time by getting in touch with your own emotions.
So you called it so you've given me 2 different ways to think about empathy. So you said intellectual empathy and then emotional
Yes.
empathy. Talk about the difference between the 2, and then I wanna dive into how you build that stronger.
Okay. Yeah. The intellectual, you could call it cognitive empathy as well. It's the ability to just look at a situation, somebody's telling you a story, and you can pick out, or you would say, I can see these pieces in that process or in that conversation, which would require me to react a certain way based on what that person is saying. And so they may not feel it because some people that have it very naturally feel empathy on a kind of intuitive feelings based level, and others can listen to the conversation or listen to what the person is saying to them and just say, oh, well, that person's, dog, cat, whatnot died. And so I need to express empathy or concern now, but they may not feel it at the onset. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like what's the guy from Big Bang Theory?
Oh,
Like someone who's Sheldon, who's
right,
gotta be like, "Okay, I'm supposed to
right.
feel this
Yeah,
way now."
right.
But so is the intellectual empathy enough? It would sound like it's the emotional empathy that really creates great leadership, but dive into that a little bit.
Well, one might take more effort than the other, right? So the emotional empathy may not take as much effort because it's natural. The intellectual, cognitive empathy may take a little bit more focus for the person to really pay attention because they don't just naturally feel it. And so it becomes more of a learned skill that you have to direct energy towards to make sure you're listening for the empathy.
So how do you build greater empathy? If we assume, as you say, you don't just you have it or you don't have
Right.
it, and some people may have it more
Yeah.
naturally. But how do we, I guess 2 things. How do we know whether we have high empathy? Because I think most of us probably think we have it,
Mhm.
but maybe we don't.
Right.
But so how do you know whether you've got that right amount of empathy? And then once you do not know that, are there things we can do to strengthen our level of empathy?
Okay. Well, I believe you know you have empathy when you're listening to someone. At the end of that conversation, you might feel tired. You might feel a little drained because you're really engaging in the conversation on many different levels, not just through the listening ear. You're also, kind of on a felt sense listening to the person. And so it takes a lot out of you. And so that's why sometimes it's important for folks with really high empathy to learn good boundaries around assessing what's their problem and what's the other person's problem or challenge, if you will, so that they don't take it on. So, another marker that you might have high empathy is if you find yourself wanting to jump in and fix things for somebody because you feel their pain or you don't like the way that discomfort is feeling. And so you want to jump in and solve other people's problems. And so that would be, a marker of high empathy as well. So those two things, just having that like drain at the end of the conversation or that like pull or desire to jump in and solve and fix.
So I want to hit on
It,
that desire to jump in and
mhm,
fix, which is not always the right thing to do.
correct.
So is there such a thing as having too much empathy, that where you feel so compelled
Mhm.
to jump in and fix the problem, you wind up micromanaging or hurting somebody else's ability to figure it out?
Yes, I call that being mindful to not steal the struggle because oftentimes we advance in our careers because we struggle through something and that builds a lot of resilience. And sometimes folks with high empathy, they remember what that felt like. because it's hard when you're going through a struggle. It feels painful. And so when you jump in to fix, you actually steal somebody else's struggle and you're also stealing their growth and development in the process. And so that's what I ask people to pay attention to is ask themselves one question, whose problem is this to solve? Truly, right? And you can do that if you look at like the role in the organization, the role in the family, who said that they were going to be responsible or accountable for it. So whose responsibility is this to solve? And if it's not yours, then you have to practice sitting in the discomfort of not taking over.
Which is
Yes.
difficult for some leaders that wanna jump
Yep.
in. And sometimes it's because they wanna be the hero,
Yeah.
but it's also sometimes because they believe that's the quickest way. If I'm just gonna give them advice, tell
Yeah.
them what to do, I'm gonna
Right.
solve this for them,
Mhm.
not realizing that it means probably a lot more pain later because you haven't taught them to do it themselves.
Correct. It's not scalable. You can't scale that, right? Because if a leader is jumping in and solving everybody's problems, then, that person's presence is required 100% of the time. And then they get to some point down the line and they have this view that I'm, surrounded by idiots, right? They wouldn't say that because they're highly empathetic, but they say, why don't I have a supportive team? I do everything for everyone. And, where can I find competent, capable, folks that can do the job that I need them to do? And the answer is by stopping yourself and allowing the people to do the job that you hired them to do.
So you talked about the markers. One is
Mhm.
you're kind of feeling tired at the end of the conversation. The other is you feel their pain, so you want to jump in and
Yep.
help. How, for those folks that don't feel those markers as often, or folks like me, if you're familiar
Right.
with the disc
Yeah.
scale, the high D's of the
Yeah.
world, like me, and I'm a high DI, so I do have some empathy
Yep.
there. But for the high D's in the world, which is a lot of entrepreneurs
Mhm.
that are just like, just give me the facts and let's get the job
Right.
done. And empathy is not always part of the equation. What could those leaders do to better build that skill?
It's a really good question. And folks that are high D's on the disc, they're always focused on a task, right? You're always focused on the task. And what is the result that we're trying to get? And in order for you to get that result, you've got to motivate this one individual to do that. So it's your job to figure out what motivates them. So is it words of affirmation? Is it, right, some level of appreciation? Is it a cash bonus? So it's your job to figure out motivation. That is a way to give empathy because you've identified something that's quick for you, that works with them, that allows you to show that you care, because that's what empathy does at the end of the day. It allows you to feel connected to the person and show that you care. So if you can figure out how to motivate that individual, then you demonstrate that you care, then you can focus on the task.
Diving into that, I mean, if I'm in figuring out how to motivate the person, it would seem to me like we've gotta cultivate a certain attitude about them.
Mhm.
Because if I wanna figure out how to motivate someone and my attitude is they're lazy and I've gotta figure out how to motivate them, then that I'm probably not being very
Right.
empathetic. I'm not gonna come off with a lot of empathy. So is there how should, for those who are very task
Right.
focused and very fact driven, just give me the facts and let's get it done. What kind of attitude might we need to cultivate about other people that would cause us to not just think about them as, people we've got to push to get the job done?
Right. Well, the last thing you said, that you have to push them, that already denotes that there's going to be this, high level of effort on your part, less on their part. I would say, though, that the belief about people has to be that they are capable and you believe that they can actually do the job. As a leader, if you don't believe that, then they should not be on your team.
That's a great point. And how do we so you've got to believe people are capable of doing the job. I want to broaden that
Mhm.
in thinking about how we think about others on the team is I want to talk a little bit about trust on a
Yeah.
team and building that psychological
Right.
safety on a team because I have come across a lot of leaders who whose attitude is, I will trust him when he proves that he's worthy
Right.
of my
Right.
trust. And my thought is, you've hired this
Mhm.
person to do a job. You need to trust they could do the job, or maybe you've hired the wrong person. But how do you, as a leader, how should you think about building that sense of trust and psychological safety on a team?
I feel like those might be maybe 2 different buckets, the psychological safety and then the trust, because trust oftentimes for folks is built on character or credibility or some combination of the both. So the person that says, "I can't trust that person yet," is probably a credibility person. They've hired somebody, they think that they can do the job, but they don't know yet. So those people, I would say what a very wise mentor said many years ago, like 30 years ish ago when I started at Target, said, You have to inspect what you expect. And that's how you build trust over time. And so you give somebody a project and you calibrate on the results and you build the trust that you need to be more and more hands off as the leader, continues to engage with this person. And you're right, though, that if they've hired the person, they have to extend the trust from the get go. And then they have to design the experiments to see if that trust deepens over time. And so, from a psychological safety perspective, the more consistent the leader is, the more trustworthy they become for the team.
What can a leader do, focusing on the psychological safety part of that? What could a leader do if they have got a team that is hesitant to challenge,
Mhm.
that's hesitant to disagree, that fears, jumping into the fire of maybe a difficult conversation? How can a leader increase what Patrick Lencioni would call that vulnerability
Right,
based trust, not the task based
right.
trust where, but that vulnerability based trust? How have you seen leaders build that psychological safety piece? Are there specific exercises, or does that just come with experience over time? How do you build that?
It's a muscle that I believe can be built over time, and it takes some reps for people because in the past, in the workplace, we've been told check your attitude, your feelings, your emotions at the door. Don't bring those into work. And the landscape around work and how we work has changed so much that the lines feel a little bit more fluid. So people have different expectations of their leaders in the workplace. And so we just have to acknowledge that, leaders are having to change in ways that they didn't think they would need to later on in their careers, oftentimes too. And for those folks, the advice or the activities we usually do are around allowing themselves to receive feedback in public from others. And I know Patrick Lencioni's has, an exercise for this. And you don't have to do that, large exercise, but the leader has to ask for feedback. How did I do on this meeting? How am I doing on the strategy? What have you noticed that isn't working? And then allow the rest of the team to see, them be challenged and see that they have a really good, mature, measured, appreciative response to the feedback.
Yeah.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
Nope.
What I have found, and I'm wondering what your thoughts on this is, kind of two things. Number one, I remember I had for 3 years, I had a staffing and recruiting firm that I owned. By the way, worst business for me. All my money went flying out the
Oh,
window.
no.
So it was not a great experience, but somehow it all led me here. So it's
Right.
all good. But I could remember, I was reading all the books and, was using all the quote
Mhm.
unquote
Right.
techniques to try to get my team to open up. And there was a member of my team that wouldn't really open up as to what she was challenged with, wouldn't challenge me if she
Mhm.
disagreed with me. And then and this was totally by mistake this happened and it worked, is I wound up being vulnerable about something that I was having a challenge
Right.
with. And what happened is when I showed that vulnerability first, all of a sudden
Mhm.
the folks on my team felt like it was okay for them to be vulnerable and ask for help or even to challenge me. on something. And I'm wondering if, is that I mean, that was something I did by
Yep.
mistake, but it would feel like that's not a bad technique, is to say, if you want people to be vulnerable with you, you've got to show it first.
Yes, and I almost said that as the first answer is that you have to set the level of disclosure by doing something like that for in front of the team as well. So when I go in and do leadership workshops, one of the first things I do is ask folks a series of questions. And then we talk about them as a team. And I always talk to the leader of the team first and let them know that they have to set the level of disclosure and how things are going to go today, right? Or through the workshop series. And so that can be pivotal. And if we're talking about, what's the biggest fear? What's the biggest thing you've learned in the last year? Right. I don't want the first person that goes to talk about something funny or flippant, right? Because that sets a level of disclosure. So that's why I kind of pre-close the leader, if you will, so that they're setting the right level of disclosure that they want on the team so that we have a really productive workshop.
How do you, again, along the lines of that psychological
Yeah.
safety and feeling comfortable entering into the fire and the debate, if there is a decision that needs to be made as a leadership
Yeah.
team and the CEO, the leader of the leaders, feels very strongly about going with option
Right.
A versus option B, how should that leader think about making their argument without shutting everybody else down, right? Because I've seen leaders that they're trying then, and specifically a CEO trying to win the
Right.
argument. Here are all the reasons why this is the right answer. And it just shuts everybody else down because they don't want to go into battle with the
Right.
CEO. So they just nod their head yes and move on. And it's like, wait a minute, there needs to be a debate here.
Right.
So how should leaders think about, how should CEOs specifically, or the leader of any team, think about entering into a debate without shutting the rest of the team down?
Well, I would offer that the first thing they would do is not consider it a debate.
Okay.
Uh, Because in a debate, there are winners and losers, right? And this is a conversation about what is best for the company and what is going to lead us to our ultimate success. And in order to be able to have that conversation, it needs to be exploratory. And the leader needs to ask better questions.
I love that. I think that's the key. In fact, there's a book. Have you read a book called Conversational Capacity?
No, I've not heard of that one.
It's a wonderful book, and it gets to the idea you're talking about here, which is when you are, I won't say debate, when you're
Right.
having a discussion, I'll use your
Yeah.
term, when you're having a discussion, um, and there are kind of two extremes of having a discussion where people may
Right.
be arguing
Hmm.
points. And one extreme is to minimize.
Hmm.
And minimize is when you sit and go, well, this may not be important,
Right.
or you guys know more about this than I do,
Right.
or the extreme version of minimizing is it stays in your head and you never even say
Right.
it. That's one extreme, which is not great. The other extreme is winning.
Hmm.
You're trying to win the
Right.
argument. You're trying to be the winner of the debate,
Right.
to your point. That's not good either because you're shutting people down. Where the right answer is right in the middle, which gets to your idea of asking questions, which is you are having this discussion, or I'll use the term
Yeah.
debate. You are entering into this debate not to win the argument, but to gather the information necessary for the team to make the best decision they could make
Right.
at the time. And the best way to do that is, even if you are emotionally arguing
Mhm.
for your answer, is saying, "Hey, I know there's a lot of smart people around this table that disagree with me. Help me, seriously, help me understand what I'm missing here."
Right.
Like those kinds of questions.
Right.
So
Yeah. Help me see what you see. Right. And another really good question, is around something to the effect of how might we solve for X? because oftentimes a CEO has already thought of the 6 or 7 things that are going to be additional challenges if they take a certain approach. And so the CEO has to be really good at identifying what those challenges are and then using the Socratic method to help the team see things sometimes, or to help pull out of the team the solutions that they have that the leader has not thought of yet. And so that can be very important. And the discomfort with debate, if you will, that comes from all kinds of things that happen outside of when we come into the workplace. It's just what happened in your family around conflict, right? What are your experiences around it? What are your experiences with people on this team and potentially even the CEO? What is your confidence level in your own voice, right? So speaking to the diminishing yourself or others in the process. So there's just so much invisible, psychological, emotional, stuff going on in those conversations. And when we keep it in the intellectual, it's almost like pretending like all of that's not there. And so creating a space for that by a leader being vulnerable and asking better questions is going to help the company get to where the CEO wants it to go faster by slowing down just a tiny bit.
I read, I forget if it was on your website or somewhere else. You talk about you have is it a content and connected
Yeah.
methodology?
Yes.
Talk about what that's for
Mm.
and what is the methodology?
The methodology is actually broken down into different pillars, and the type of client that comes to me often is the one that is, a successful high achiever. They've, achieved more than they ever thought was possible, most likely, and then they get to this point and they're thinking, so what now? It's almost like they plateau. They're not sure what they want to do next. The things that they were doing were, haven't given them this sense of like fulfillment or purpose that they wanted in their life or they thought was going to make them happy. So it's almost like this little bit of disillusionment at that point. And so what we have to do is to increase their self-awareness around what they really want because they've been chasing all of these things externally that everybody told them that they should be chasing without actually considering what they do want. And so what happens is it ends up trickling out into their business. They might hire people that depend on them more than they do for the company, right? They might bring on vendors that aren't really aligned to their values or the culture because they haven't really thought about what their needs, what their standards are, what their expectations. And so we've got to go on this journey around understanding that, increasing self awareness, increasing self acceptance, because the only way to continue to grow is by understanding where you are weak as well as where you are strong and not apologizing for that anymore and just really embracing that. And then holding people accountable to your standards as you understand them and the person that you are today, and so at that point, you're able to feel much more content, much more peaceful, and feel connected to all the people around you because it's clear how to win with you.
So what are the pillars there?
So it depends. So there's 12 different ones. And
Ooh,
yeah,
12.
yeah,
Wow.
I know. Like, I don't think I'm going to go through all of them, right? But one of them is, I would say, feel, don't fix. Feel, don't fix, because they have to understand, as I was mentioning before, where they might be jumping in to solve people's problems that are preventing them from learning the information that will actually take the company to a much better place and free up a lot of the CEO's time. And so we do a deep dive on a lot of practical exercises and understanding what that, how to do that. And so that becomes one of the methodologies that we use.
Got it. And you mentioned as part of this methodology, you mentioned that it starts with a level of
Yeah.
self-awareness to what you want. How do we know if we're like again, it kind of like empathy. We all think we're self-aware. How do we know if we're
Mhm.
self-aware and how do you build more self-awareness?
You know you're self aware when you can genuinely laugh at yourself, when you see that you've made a mistake, or you realize that you're just simply not good at a certain thing and you don't feel this compulsion to try and make it better and you're comfortable talking about it in public.
then I must be incredibly self-aware because I stink at a whole bunch
right?
of things. I'm very good at a narrow set of things and I stink at most. So I feel good. I'm very self-aware.
That's good, right? And you can be playful about it. And you're willing to give other people permission to give you feedback when you are working on something. So I remember when my son was pretty young, like 8 or 9, I realized that I had a little streak of being passive aggressive, and I actually didn't think that I was. And I told my son what it was, what passive aggressiveness looks like. And I said, I want you to tell me when I'm doing this so that I can get better at it. And how fast do you think I fixed that when my 9-year-old was telling me how passive aggressive I was being? So
So a big part of this is being coachable.
100%, right? So, yes, coachable and also just willing to be vulnerable and willing to ask folks around you to be mirrors for you because it is impossible for us to be 100% self aware. We are the fish in the bowl, we do not see the water. And we have to have people around us that are willing to tell us the truth, and we have to watch our reactions to somebody telling us the truth as they see it, sometimes as they see it, right? And be willing to integrate that into our way of thinking without going through the shame spiral, because that's where we get stuck. If we wind up in a shame spiral because we feel like we shouldn't have done this, we shouldn't have done that, then we've stopped being self aware.
I'm going to make a left
Go for
turn.
it.
And I wanted to actually, I've got in my head two things I wanna hit before we start to wrap up that are more current and less kind of just general
Mhm.
leadership things. And one is the polarization
Mm,
we're all living
right.
through right now. And, when we're recording this and when this
Mhm.
airs, it's not too long after,
Yeah.
our presidential election in the United States. And, I'm old enough to remember the days when, you were never really supposed to talk about politics in the
Mhm.
office, but 25, 30 years ago, you can do that and have an intelligent
Right.
conversation and not you get yourself into too much hot water
Right.
by talking about left versus right or Democrat versus Republican. We live in a very different time right now and have for probably 20 years, but it's continued to get more and more polarized. How should leaders think about that? Because I've had leaders
Mhm.
bring up the election or politics and what they think, and I'm thinking, "Oh my god, what are you doing?
Right.
This is not gonna go well." And sometimes it goes perfectly fine and sometimes it doesn't. But I've also seen it come up, on teams and cause issues. So,
Um,
as a leader, how should we be thinking about those types of polarizing conversations? Do we jump into the fire and be vulnerable and have those conversations? Do we stay away from those conversations at all costs, or is there some healthy place in the middle?
yeah, it's a good question, especially in this day and age. You're right. And I've got leaders that I work with that are, kind of all over that spectrum. Some talk about it very openly at work, and some say it should never enter work. I'd first ask a leader to go to their culture and their values, whether or not talking about politics is aligned to what their culture is and what their values or principles are. If transparency and candor and these types of things are their values and they're actually lived in the business, then they might be able to talk about politics. And the key will be to create space for everyone's perspectives, because that's what gets missed. A leader has to understand when they speak, they have positional authority. And what that means is that, how they believe about politics is going to influence the way the team may feel about politics. And the team may react to that. And so they have to be prepared for that. When you have seen it work well versus when it didn't work well, what was the difference?
It's a great question, and I haven't thought about it. I think the difference was a willingness to listen
Mhm.
to the other
Right.
side, whatever the other side is. And, there tends to be, we've all seen this, there tends to be this feeling of, if I'm on one side and you're on the
Right.
other, it must be because you're stupid or because you're a bad
Right.
person or because you're crazy. And I was just in a situation, not a work situation, but a friends over for dinner
Yeah.
situation not too long ago. And someone started talking about politics and was making the assumption that the people that disagreed with her were just
Right.
lunatics or not very
Mhm.
smart. And that when I never see that go well,
Right.
whether it's in a social
Mhm.
situation or a business situation. But I've seen in social situations and I've seen in business situations people who have the ability to say what they believe but say, "Hey, what am I missing? Like, how do you guys feel about
Right.
this?" Or, you know, some ability to see the other side as normal, good people, trying to do the right thing versus demonizing the other side. That to me has been the big difference. And you see that less and less often these days, the willingness to not demonize the other side.
Yes, and so this will be a little bit of a left turn too, because when I think about that, what I see is that people have genuinely lost a sense of belonging in a lot of areas of their lives. And, as we move to more remote workforces after COVID and during COVID, people, aren't the church attendance is down, right? There's lots of affiliations that we used to have that we don't have anymore. And so the sense of belonging comes out of, the social media or in our political party or wherever we can find it. And so if you have a different opinion than me, then you are threatening my sense of belonging and that I matter, right? And that is, an existential, but also like a survival threat, right? Just that our brains have not evolved to the point yet where we can withstand that kind of, threat of being cast out of the community. So when a leader does talk about it, I would imagine, like you said, they have, deep listening, all of that. That's what I meant by making space. It's they talk about it in a way that invites the other person to talk about themselves and what they believe, and they still create a sense of community and belonging in the process. That we all are still together here. We just want to create this container where we can have these conversations. And, this happened back in 2016 during the first election. I found our family, my husband at the time and my son and I had all very different political views. And it was a complete surprise to me. And I would love to say that I handled it perfectly the first time. I absolutely did not. One of the worst parenting moments ever. And it was all full of ego. And then that started a journey to where up to this day now, it's very easy for the three of us to have conversations about politics and to really understand each other's perspectives because there's still a sense of family there and that we are connected, even though now my husband is my ex-husband and there's still a sense of family and connection so that we can talk about those things. So that's what leaders need to do is create that sense of belonging, the community before they attempt to have a conversation like that.
It's so important because what you're making me think, and I agree with this, is that it's not, when people talk politics these days, it's not what they're thinking or how they're feeling or what they believe. It's become who they are.
Correct.
And if you are challenging who they are
Exactly.
or you're telling them who they are is
Right.
wrong, it's hard to find a way back
Right.
from that. And leaders need to understand whether they're on the right side or the
Right.
left, they need to understand that people relate this stuff to who they are.
Right.
So tread carefully and
Right.
you could have an interesting discussion, but don't don't challenge who people are. So I like that. The other thing that is less generic and more kind of current events is AI,
Right.
artificial
Hmm.
intelligence. And it feels like every month that goes by, there's about a 5-year leap,
Right.
in technology. How should leaders be thinking about AI these days? Does it and how does it impact leadership, or is leadership pre-AI
Right.
and post-AI the same thing?
Absolutely. I've been thinking about this a lot actually, and I had an argument with ChatGPT about it too. So I basically I did.
Did you create psychological safety with ChatGPT and
Basically, yes,
vulnerability?
because I started I actually told it at one point it was gaslighting me, and I didn't appreciate it, and it apologized. And but I asked it, I said, moving forward from a leadership perspective, what is the difference between what you can do, GPT, for employees and managing that a leader can or can't do? So it's a very interesting conversation. But I think, in general, AI is a resource and a tool for leaders, and they need to look at it that way. So, if I'm putting together a job description or marketing or copy or whatnot, Chat GPT is a great resource for that. They can do in 2 minutes what might take me or you or somebody else, a couple of hours to sit down and do all the research. So it's a great aggregator of information. It accelerates a leader that's willing to jump in and figure out how to use it well. And quite frankly, the way you use AI really well is ask it better questions. So there's a theme there. And so it will be very helpful to the leaders in the future. I think the leaders that will transcend AI are quite candidly the ones with the highest amounts of emotional intelligence, because AI does have intellectual empathy, cognitive empathy. It knows how to respond to you, but it doesn't know how to make you feel like it's connected to you. Humans can still do that much better than any AI advance.
Yeah, and at least at this point, and who knows where it's going, but at this point, I look at AI for leaders as, most leaders have a goal of spending more time working on the
Right,
business, which includes working to develop their people and working on
right,
strategy. They want to spend more time working on the business and less time working in the business. And AI handled the right way is something that's an incredible
right,
tool to allow you and your team to do that. Now, maybe down the road, it develops feelings and connections like we do, and then we've got to think of a different way to
right.
leverage that. But I do think it's the best tool I've ever seen to help us spend more time working on the business than in the business.
Absolutely. And if you get good at training a GPT to, with your company's principles, values, kind of your handbook, any of your acronyms and all of that, then it becomes an invaluable tool to help you create anything and everything that you might want to do for your company.
Christine, as we start to wrap
Mhm.
up, I want to focus more on you and your
Yeah,
company and what you do. So tell us more about, I don't even know if we said the name of your company anywhere.
yeah,
So tell us the name of your
right.
company and kind of who you focus on helping and how you help them.
So the name of the company is Intently, and I support two types of leaders. One in the one to one. I have a very small number of clients that I work with one to one, and these folks are usually leaders of very large teams, very large organizations, and are really looking for support on strategy, leadership, team development, and their own personal development. And oftentimes a lot in communication too. And when it comes to the group coaching program, that's really the mid to senior level leader that I talked about earlier that is, at this plateau where they have achieved a high level of success and they don't know where to go from here. And they're feeling a little bit lost because they've always been the good person, the good leader, and they don't know what to do next. And so that's where they start the journey in the group coaching program through the Content and Connected methodology so that they understand themselves better, they develop a level of self-acceptance, and then they're able to, kind of take off again because in the past they were running from something quite, possibly. And after we go through the program, now they're running towards something. They know what the aim is towards. It's just not escaping the pain or expecting to be what, everyone around you or society expects you to be.
And if people want to find out more about you or Intently and your programs, and of course, this will be in the show notes, but where should they go?
Well, definitely the website. So that's www.intentlyco.com. And if they'd like a copy of our inner critic guide, Overcoming Your Inner Critic, because we all have that negative self talk at times. And so I've got a great guide on how to identify it, how to overcome it, and work with it. Or the values exercise workbook. We have that as well. I have some unique exercises that help you uncover your values, not just the unconsciously accepted ones that folks believe that they have. They can email join@intentlyco.com.
Beautiful. Definitely take Christina up on that. And as I always say, if you want a great company, you need a great leadership team. Christina, thanks so much for helping us get there today.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's been great.